The brink of extinction. Humanity's end. The world was dying. Commander Zura Solari stared out the reinforced windows of Olympus Base at the desolate wasteland stretching to the horizon. Towering dust storms raced across empty plains that once teemed with life. Now only the shattered remains of civilization broke the barren expanse. It hadn't always been this way. Zara could still remember a time of blue skies and thriving cities before the cataclysm struck. But that world was gone, lost in a devastating extraterrestrial attack that brought humanity to its knees. In mere months, the vast majority of Earth's population had perished. Only a few scattered pockets of survivors remained, holed up in underground shelters and fortified bases like this one. Zara turned away from the window, unable to bear the sight any longer. She marched down the Spartan hallway, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Olympus Base was never meant to be humanity's final refuge. It had been conceived as a research outpost, a daring project to develop the technologies that would take mankind to the stars. Now it served as a tomb, the last bastion against the looming specter of extinction. The Hail Mary, Zara reached the base's central command center and stepped inside. The room was a hive of activity, filled with scientists and engineers hunched over monitors and control panels. At the center of it all stood Dr. Liam Sorensen, the base's lead researcher. His eyes were bloodshot and his hair disheveled, a testament to the long hours he'd spent poring over schematics and simulations. "Commander Solari," he said, looking up as Zara approached, "I think we may have a solution." Zara felt a flicker of hope in her chest, but tamped it down. She'd heard this before, seen too many promising ideas wither under the cold light of reality. "Show me," she said simply. Dr. Sorensen brought up a holographic display, filling the air with glowing diagrams and equations. "We've been working on a way to create an artificial wormhole," he explained, his voice tight with excitement. "A portal to another place and time, beyond the reach of the cataclysm." Zara studied the display, trying to make sense of the complex physics. "Is it possible?" she asked. "Theoretically, yes," Dr. Sorensen said. "But there are significant risks. The power requirements are immense, and there's no guarantee of where or when the wormhole will lead. It's a Hail Mary, a shot in the dark." Zara closed her eyes, the weight of the decision settling onto her shoulders. She thought of the survivors huddled in the base below, the last remnants of humanity awaiting their fate. They were out of options, out of time. This was their only chance. "Do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to try." A glimmer of hope. The next days passed in a blur of frenetic activity as the base's personnel threw themselves into the task at hand. Engineers worked around the clock to assemble the wormhole generator, a towering apparatus that dominated the center of the command room. Scientists ran countless simulations, trying to predict the outcomes of their desperate gambit. Through it all, Zora watched and waited, her heart alternating between hope and dread. She knew the risks, knew that this could be humanity's final act, but even the slimmest chance was better than the certainty of oblivion. Finally, after a week of ceaseless toil, they were ready. The survivors gathered in the command center, their faces drawn and haggard but alight with a fragile hope. Dr. Sorensen took his place at the control panel, his hands trembling as he input the final commands. "Initiating wormhole generation," he announced, his voice cracking with tension. "May the gods have mercy on us all." The generator hummed to life, filling the air with a rising whine. Electricity crackled along its surface as a blinding light began to build at its core. Zara shielded her eyes, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Then, with a final deafening roar, the wormhole burst into existence. A swirling vortex of light and shadow. It seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. For a heartbeat, Zara forgot to breathe, transfixed by the impossible sight. A cheer went up from the assembled survivors, a primal cry of relief and triumph. Against all odds, they had done it. They had created a doorway to salvation, a path out of the ashes of the old world. But as Zara stared into the wormhole's mesmerizing depths, a flicker of doubt crept into her mind. Where did it lead? What awaited them on the other side? Humanity had defied oblivion, but at what cost? Only one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, united by the unyielding spirit that had carried them through the darkest of times. The impossible had been made possible. Now it was time to discover what that meant. The story will continue in Part 2 as humanity launches through the wormhole to an unknown fate, with plenty of twists, revelations, and displays of the human spirit to come. Let me know if you would like me to proceed with drafting the remaining parts. The audacious plan. Promethean ashes. The wormhole generator thrummed with barely restrained power, casting pulsing shadows across the command center. Zara tore her gaze away from the mesmerizing vortex and faced the assembled survivors. These were the last of humanity, the hardy few who had weathered the cataclysm and its aftermath. In their eyes, she saw a mixture of hope and fear, determination and exhaustion. "I know you're all wondering what comes next," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "The truth is, we don't know for sure. But we do know this. We have a chance, a shot at survival beyond the ashes of our old world. And we're going to take it." She gestured to Dr. Sorensen, who stepped forward with a grim nod. "The wormhole is stable, but we don't know how long it will remain open," he explained. "We have to act fast. The generator was only ever meant as a prototype, and the strain of maintaining the wormhole will soon tear it apart." Zara picked up the thread. "That's why we've been working on a plan, a way to give our species the best possible chance, even if it means sacrificing everything we have left." Whispers raced through the crowd, a mix of trepidation and anticipation. Zara let it wash over her, drawing strength from their resilience. They had come so far, endured so much. She would not let their struggle be in vain. "Arc ships and seed banks. We have two priorities," she continued. "Firstly, to ensure the survival of our knowledge and culture. Secondly, to give our descendants the best possible chance of rebuilding and thriving in whatever world awaits them." Dr. Sorensen tapped a command into his console, and a holographic schematic bloomed to life above their heads. It depicted a fleet of sleek, angular ships, each bristling with solar sails and studded with generation pods. A murmur of awe rippled through the survivors. "Behold the Arc ships," Dr. Sorensen said, pride and sorrow mingling in his voice. "Each one a self-contained world, capable of sustaining a population in cryostasis for centuries. They will be our emissaries into the unknown, carrying the seeds of humanity to new soils." Zara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. The Arc ships were a marvel of engineering and desperation, born from the tireless work of the base's scientists in the dwindling months since the cataclysm. They represented humanity's defiance in the face of annihilation, their refusal to go gently into the night. "But the Arc ships are only part of the plan," she said. "We cannot put all our hopes in one basket. That is why we have also created the seed banks." Another schematic appeared, this one depicting smaller, hardier vessels. Each one was little more than a reinforced shell surrounding a glowing core of databanks and genetic samples. "The seed banks will carry the essence of our world," Dr. Sorensen explained. "The sum total of our knowledge, our art, our history. And not just our own species, but the biosphere that sustained us. Seeds, embryos, DNA sequences, a Noah's Ark for the ashes of Earth." Last goodbyes. A hush fell over the survivors as the scope of the plan sank in. They were being asked to leave everything behind, to cast themselves into the void with no guarantee of survival. But what choice did they have? To stay on Earth was to embrace extinction, to consign their species to the dust of a dead world. Zara let the silence stretch for a long moment before she spoke again. "I know what we are asking of you," she said softly. "To leave behind all that you have ever known, all that you have fought so hard to preserve. But this is our only hope, our only chance to give meaning to the sacrifices of all those who came before us." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the survivors. In their eyes, she saw the same determination that had carried them through the darkest of times, the unquenchable fire of the human spirit. "We have 24 hours to prepare," she said. 24 hours to say our goodbyes, to make our peace with this world, and then we will embark, not as survivors, but as pioneers, as the seed of humanity carried on the wings of our audacity to a new dawn. As the command center erupted into a flurry of activity, Zura turned back to the wormhole. It swirled and danced, a portal to an unknown future. She felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders, the burden of the impossible task they had set themselves. But beneath it all, a flicker of hope burned in her chest. They had come so far, defied so many odds. Whatever lay beyond the wormhole, they would face it as they always had, together, united by the unyielding spirit of humanity. The Ark ships would carry them forward. The seed banks would ensure their legacy. The audacious plan was in motion. All that remained was to see it through, to the very end. The story continues in Part 3 as humanity launches through the wormhole in their Ark ships and seed banks, facing untold perils as they seek a new home among the stars. More twists, revelations, and demonstrations of human determination to come. Let me know if you would like me to proceed with drafting the remaining parts of this HFY tale. Defying the odds. The crossing. The wormhole generator reached a fevered pitch, its hum building to a deafening roar. Zara stood before the pulsing vortex, her heart hammering in her chest. Behind her, the survivors bustled about, making their final preparations. The Ark ships and seed banks stood ready, gleaming in the harsh light of the command center. Initiating launch sequence. Dr. Sorensen called out, his voice taut with tension. All systems green. Wormhole stable. Zara nodded, her mouth dry. This was it, the moment of truth. She turned to face the survivors, seeing in their faces a reflection of her own turbulent emotions. Fear, hope, determination, all mingled into a potent cocktail of human spirit. "Today, we embark on the greatest journey in the history of our species," she said, her voice carrying over the din. "Today, we defy the odds, defy the very fate that sought to extinguish us. Today, we prove that humanity will not go quietly into the night." A cheer went up from the assembled, a primal cry of defiance and unity. Zara felt it wash over her, bolstering her resolve. She turned back to the wormhole, squaring her shoulders. "Ark ships, prepare for launch," she commanded. "Seed banks, stand by." One by one, the sleek vessels lifted off, gliding towards the swirling vortex. They vanished into its depths, swallowed by the luminous maelstrom. Zara watched them go, a fierce pride burning in her chest. Against all odds, humanity had dared to dream, to reach for a future beyond the ashes of their old world. Perils and setbacks. But their journey was far from over. As the last of the Ark ships vanished into the wormhole, alarms began to blare throughout the command center. Dr. Sorensen's eyes widened as he scanned the readouts before him. "The wormhole is destabilizing," he shouted over the klaxons. "The generator can't sustain it." Zara felt a cold knot of fear in her gut. They had known this was a possibility, but to have it happen so soon. She forced down her rising panic, focusing on the task at hand. "Seed banks, you're up," she barked. "Get through that wormhole. Now." The hardier vessels, laden with the precious cargo of human knowledge and Earth's biosphere, surged forward. They plunged into the vortex just as it began to flicker and waver, its edges fraying like a worn tapestry. "Generators redlining," Dr. Sorensen cried. "It's going to blow." Zara made a split-second decision. "Evacuate the command center," she ordered. "Everyone to the escape pods." The survivors scrambled to obey, racing for the emergency shuttles. Zara lingered at the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to coax more power, more time from the faltering generator. "Commander, we have to go," Dr. Sorensen urged, tugging at her arm. Zara shook him off, her eyes locked on the redouts. The wormhole was failing, its structure unraveling. She could see the last of the seed banks struggling to make it through, fighting against the collapsing vortex. Just a little more, she prayed silently. Just a little more. Revelation. With a final, heroic surge, the last seed bank vanished into the wormhole. At the same instant, the generator let out a tortured groan, its casing cracking as white-hot energy spilled forth. Zara had a moment of blinding clarity, a crystal-clear realization of what was about to happen. Then the world went white. When she came to, she was floating in a void. Stars wheeled overhead, unfamiliar constellations painting the inky black. Debris spiraled around her, the shattered remnants of Olympus base. And there, in the distance, a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. Earth, hanging in the void like a blue-green jewel, but not the Earth she knew, ravaged by the cataclysm and choked with ash. This was an Earth untouched, pristine, teeming with life. Zara's mind reeled as the implications sank in. The wormhole, in its final collapse, had torn open a rift not just in space, but in time. They had been flung back to a point before the cataclysm, before the fall of humanity. A chance to start over. A chance to do things differently. As Zara floated there, staring at the impossible vision before her, she felt a fierce hope blossom in her chest. The Ark ships and seed banks were out there somewhere, scattered across this virgin earth. And with them, the unyielding spirit of humanity, ready to begin anew. They had defied the odds, defied oblivion itself. Now it was time to see what they could build from the ashes of the future. The story will continue in Part 4 as Zara and the survivors begin their new lives on this pristine earth, facing challenges and opportunities they never could have imagined. The building of a new civilization, the discovery of the Ark ships and seed banks, and the looming specter of the original timeline's fate all await. Let me know if you would like me to proceed with drafting the final 2 parts of this HFY epic. A New Dawn. Planetfall. Zara stared out the viewport of the escape pod as it descended through the atmosphere, her heart racing with a mixture of trepidation and awe. Beside her, Dr. Sorensen and a handful of other survivors clutched at their restraints, their faces reflecting the same tumultuous emotions. Below them, Earth spread out in a tapestry of vibrant greens and blues, untouched by the ravages of the cataclysm. Vast forests stretched to the horizons, interspersed with the glittering threads of rivers and the patchwork of grasslands. It was a vision of paradise, a world reborn. But as the escape pod plummeted towards the surface, Zora's mind was already racing ahead, grappling with the challenges that awaited them. They had escaped oblivion by the skin of their teeth, but their journey was far from over. The pod hit the ground with a jarring impact, throwing its occupants against their harnesses. For a moment, there was only the sound of labored breathing and the hiss of settling hydraulics. Then, with a hiss of released pressure, the hatch swung open. Zara was the first to step out, blinking in the dazzling sunlight. The air was sweet and clean, free of the choking ash and acrid smoke that had haunted her memories. She took a deep breath, savoring the taste of life on her tongue. "We made it," Dr. Sorensen said, his voice hushed with wonder as he emerged behind her. "We actually made it. Building a haven." But the euphoria of their arrival was short-lived. As the survivors gathered around the escape pod, the magnitude of their task began to sink in. They were alone on an untamed world, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the contents of the escape pod's emergency kits. "We need to find shelter," Zara said, her voice taking on the tone of command. "And we need to locate the Ark ships and seed banks. They hold the key to our survival." The survivors set to work with a will, driven by the unquenchable human spirit that had carried them through the darkest of times. They salvaged what they could from the escape pod, fashioning crude tools and shelters from its metal skin. Days turned to weeks as they labored to build a new home, a haven in the wilderness. They foraged for food, hunted the abundant game, and tapped the crystal-clear streams for water. Slowly but surely, a village began to take shape, a testament to humanity's unyielding determination. But always at the back of their minds was the knowledge of what they had left behind. The Ark ships and seed banks, scattered across the globe by the collapsing wormhole. The precious cargo of human knowledge and Earth's biosphere, waiting to be reclaimed. A promising discovery. It was Dr. Sorensen who found the first clue. He had been exploring the surrounding area, mapping the terrain and cataloging the flora and fauna. When he stumbled back into the village one evening, his face was alight with excitement. "I found something," he gasped out, waving a battered device in his hand. A homing beacon from one of the seed banks. Zara felt a surge of hope at his words. The seed banks were designed to emit a distress signal upon planetfall, a guide for any survivors to follow. If they could locate even one of them. "Show me," she demanded. Dr. Sorensen led her to a clearing a few miles from the village. There, nestled in a bed of crushed ferns, was a sight that brought tears to Zora's eyes. A seed bank, its hull scorched and dented but intact, pulsing with the steady rhythm of its homing beacon. "We found it," she whispered, laying a hand on the cool metal. "We actually found it." Rebuilding and remembering. With the discovery of the seed bank, a new chapter began in the survivors' struggle. They threw themselves into the task of recovering its precious cargo, poring over the databanks and genetic samples with a fervor born of desperation and hope. Piece by piece, they began to rebuild the lost knowledge of humanity. They resurrected the secrets of agriculture, of medicine, of engineering. They delved into the history and culture of the earth that was, preserving it for the generations to come. And as they labored, they never forgot the lessons of the past. They knew that they had been given a second chance, a precious gift bought with the sacrifices of all those who had come before. They were determined not to squander it, not to repeat the mistakes that had led to the cataclysm. But always, at the edges of their new world, lurked the specter of the future they had escaped. The knowledge of what had been, and what might still come to pass. They had defied oblivion once, but could they do so again? Could they build a civilization that would stand the test of time, that would endure against the challenges that had brought down their predecessors? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the unyielding spirit of humanity would never stop trying. The story concludes in Part 5 as the survivors face a final challenge that threatens their fledgling civilization, putting to the test all that they have learned and all that they have become. The fate of humanity hangs in the balance one last time. Let me know if you would like me to draft the epic conclusion to this HFY tale. The impossible made possible. A thriving civilization. Years turned to decades as the survivors labored to build their new world. Under Zora's leadership and Dr. Sorensen's guidance, their humble village grew into a thriving town, then a bustling city. The knowledge and resources from the recovered seed banks and Ark ships fueled their progress, allowing them to achieve marvels of science and engineering that would have seemed impossible in the aftermath of the cataclysm. But even as they prospered, they never forgot the lessons of the past. They built their civilization on the principles of sustainability, equality, and harmony with nature. They vowed never again to repeat the mistakes that had brought humanity to the brink of extinction. Zara watched it all with a mixture of pride and trepidation. She had led her people out of the ashes of oblivion, guided them to a new dawn. But always, at the back of her mind, lurked the fear of what the future might hold. They had been given a second chance, but would it be enough? Could they truly escape the fate that had befallen their predecessors? The answer came on a day like any other. Zara was in her office, poring over reports from the far-flung settlements that had sprung up across the planet, when an urgent message came in from the city's observatory. A looming threat. "Commander Solari, you need to see this." The astronomer's voice crackled over the comm. "We've detected an anomaly in Earth's orbit. Something's coming." Zara felt a chill run down her spine at those words. She hurried to the observatory, her mind racing with possibilities. When she arrived, the astronomers were huddled around their displays, their faces pale and drawn. "There," one of them said, pointing to a blip on the screen. It appeared out of nowhere, just beyond the moon's orbit, and it's heading straight for us. Zara leaned in, her heart pounding. The object was massive, dwarfing anything they had ever seen. And as she watched, it began to change, unfolding like a blooming flower of metal and light. "It's a ship," she breathed. "A ship from the future. Defiance and unity." The revelation sent shockwaves through the city. The survivors had always known that their past might catch up with them, that the timeline they had escaped might reassert itself. But to have it happen now, when they had come so far. Zara called an emergency meeting of the city's council. As the leaders debated and argued, she stood silent, her mind whirling with possibilities. They could try to flee, to hide from the approaching ship, but where could they go? This was their home, their world. They had nowhere else. In the end, it was Dr. Sorensen who gave voice to what they were all thinking. "We have to fight," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We have to stand our ground and show whoever's on that ship that humanity will not go quietly into the night." Zara felt a surge of pride at his words. He was right. They had come too far, fought too hard, to give up now. They would face this challenge as they had faced all the others. Together, united by the unyielding spirit that had carried them through the darkest of times. The city became a hive of activity as they prepared for the confrontation. The Ark ships were reactivated, their weapon systems brought online for the first time in decades. The seed banks were fortified, their precious cargo secured against any eventuality, and the people of the city donned the armor of their convictions, ready to defend their home and their future. The final stand. When the ship entered Earth's atmosphere, it was met by a wall of defiance. The Ark ships rose to meet it, their shields glowing with the fire of humanity's determination. On the ground, the city's defenders stood ready, armed with the weapons of their own making and the courage of their hearts. For a moment, the two forces faced each other in a tense standoff. Then, with a roar that shook the heavens, the battle began. It was a clash of titans, a struggle between the past and the future, between the specter of oblivion and the hope of a new dawn. The ship from the future was a marvel of technology, armed with weapons that could shatter continents and vaporize oceans. But the defenders of Earth had something the invaders did not: the unbreakable will of humanity, forged in the crucible of the cataclysm and tempered by the trials of building a new world. The battle raged for days, the skies above the city lit by the fires of war. The ground trembled with the impact of titanic blows. The air rang with the screams of the dying and the roar of defiance. But through it all, the defenders held firm, unwavering in their resolve. And then, against all odds, they began to push back, the human spirit triumphant. It was a moment that would be remembered for generations. The ship from the future, the herald of oblivion, began to falter under the onslaught of humanity's defiance. Its shields flickered and died, its weapons fell silent. And then, with a final terrible groan, it broke apart, its fragments raining down upon the scared and battered earth. Zara stood amidst the rubble, her armor scorched and dented, her face streaked with blood and grime. Around her, the survivors of the battle wept and cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph and relief. They had done it. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Dr. Sorensen found her there, his own face a mask of exhaustion and elation. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse from shouting. "We actually did it." Zara nodded, too tired for words. They had won the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. The ship from the future was just the first salvo, a harbinger of the challenges to come. But as she looked around at the faces of her people, alight with the fire of the human spirit, she felt a surge of hope. They had defied oblivion once. They would do so again, and again, as many times as it took. For that was the essence of humanity: the refusal to surrender, the will to keep fighting, no matter the odds. The impossible had been made possible. The future was theirs, to shape as they saw fit. and they would face it as they always had, together, united by the unyielding spirit that had carried them out of the ashes and into the dawn of a new era.